Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is August 1st, which means we've got about 3 months to go before the 2024 election. And today I'm going to be giving my Donald Trump best case scenario with where we are now, the math a little bit different. This is Trump's absolute best case as I see it right now. It is a little bit vague because we're waiting for more polling. Kamala Harris, the ridiculous numbers, doing basically nothing, but somehow I think this actually encompasses it and shows it. I saw this on Twitter. You can see the basically straight line up in terms of her approval rating going from 36% to 42%. And by the way, I'm not sure that's done climbing based off of some of these recent polls. Maybe it is. You can understand that as a VP, you're kind of in the shadows. Normally that helps the VP. They're not as hated as the president. In this case, Kamala was widely more hated than Biden, or at least it was close until the end, and then Biden really got bad in terms of his approval rating. But pretty remarkable in the span of 2 weeks, Kamala Harris basically doing nothing, going on no major networks, taking no questions or anything like that, not getting grilled on anything, and she's up 7%. Mainstream media, it's still very powerful. It has a grasp over at least part of the Democrats and obviously also the independents, it seems like. So, I mean, this was an unfavorability rating plus 16. What date was that? June 15th. It stayed that way until July it was at 17. So it is pretty remarkable. I just wanted to show that to kind of give everyone a guide on how crazy this is. We've seen some polls that are a lot closer with Harris leading in some of them. So will this be a little bit of a different map? I'm going to go state by state. I am not going to save the swing states for the end. I'm just going to go through all of them. So we will start on the West Coast. Washington, certainly. The way I color code it, if it's a lock, I just give it to you automatically in the darkest shade. So I think Washington is a lock. Oregon, I'm going to lighten up slightly because there was that funny poll that came out yesterday. I don't know if it's in the Real Clear Politics average. I actually want to look at that. Oregon, yeah, they don't have it as dark. They don't even have it in here. But it was only Harris plus 5, which is pretty remarkable. There was a poll where it was Trump versus Biden in Oregon that was Biden plus 2. But certainly I think Harris is going to win Oregon. It would be funny, though, if Trump somehow won it. California, obviously going to go to Harris. Alaska goes to Harris as well. Moving on to Trump, obviously Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Alaska, all going to Trump. Utah easily going to Trump. Getting to Nevada. Now, Nevada is the first swing state we're going to be talking about. Taking a look at the current polls in Nevada, they've got it as a pure swing state, 538 does. There really have not been a ton of recent polls. Now, you look at this and you say, this is really good news for Trump. This is kind of similar to how he was polling against Biden. But I'm looking at the date that these polls were taken. I do believe there have been a few recent polls in Nevada that have been slightly more closer, to be fair to Harris. If you do the 5-way, I wonder if there's anything. I don't think it'll show up. Yeah, it's not showing up. But certainly the race is tightened in many of these swing states. That's kind of expected considering the Democrats feel rejuvenated. They've got the whole younger candidate thing. But, I mean, it's ridiculous. She wasn't elected. They installed her, number one, as a DEI. And I'm not even going to talk about it. But I do think Trump will win Nevada still. And, of course, this is a Trump best-case scenario. So, I mean, right now, even if you want to say, oh, Harris is making up ground, Trump is still leading the aggregate in Nevada, even in recent polls. And so even in a best-case scenario, obviously, I'm going to give Trump Nevada. When it comes to Arizona, taking a look at some of the recent polls in Arizona, obviously, in a best-case scenario, Trump's going to win it. You've got that Bloomberg poll. By the way, I went back and looked at some of the other Bloomberg polls. They had Biden doing better in a lot of states than he was in other polls. So it's like Bloomberg has seemingly almost a liberal bias, maybe in just the way they poll, I don't know. But obviously the Bloomberg poll in Pennsylvania was just ridiculous with Harris plus 11. The good news for Trump is it's just one poll, and also there's 3 months to go. It really doesn't matter. And I believe Trump, even with that poll, still leads in the aggregate in terms of Real Clear Politics. So right now, I mean, Trump's been ahead this entire time in Arizona. There's a lot of Republicans that are very worried about Arizona. I think with the voter registration right now, it's a huge advantage for the Republicans. As long as they turn out, they should win. Kerry Lake, on the other hand, that's a different story, but Donald Trump should win, and I will lighten it a bit. I don't think those are like 1 point razor-thin margins. If they were, I would make it that shade, but I do think that it'll maybe be a 3 or 4 point win for Donald Trump. In a best-case scenario, can I give Trump Colorado right now? I just cannot do it. I will lighten it a little bit. There's been some things with Colorado, some polls where it was Trump versus Biden. Biden was only up by 2, but there were other polls that had Biden up by a lot more. A lot of liberals moving to Colorado, a lot of liberals moving to some of these other Western states like Oregon, which could prevent Trump from winning that. So I'm going to say Colorado stays with the Democrats. New Mexico is a very tough state. And in terms of a best case scenario for Trump, we remember the Democratic internal polls where it was Trump versus Biden that I think got leaked by people within the Democratic Party because they were trying to force Biden out. But those polls, I mean, they did have Trump up in New Mexico. They did. Now that you have Harris, minority female, how does that play in New Mexico? Probably better. And right now, even in a best case scenario, I cannot give Trump New Mexico. You could argue it, but right now I just can't do it. Moving on to Texas, obviously Trump's going to win Texas guaranteed. Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, the statewide. You do have the 2nd district that right now is a swing state. Best case scenario, I'm certainly going to give it to Trump. I think it'll be very close, but lower population, Trump barely lost it. The problem we're running into now, this is kind of the thing that I was always able to say, even just it was just so much easier because based off of Biden's horrible approval rating, when I would do these predictions, it was like I could get Trump up to 400 electoral votes very easily. Now with the bullshit media spin and with Harris's approval rating being better than Trump's right now, I don't know if it'll stay that way, but with Biden, it was just so easy because of how bad his approval rating was and how we could kind of factor that in versus 2020. That's not to say, Trump is still polling amazing compared to 2020 and 2016, but it is worse, and we're seeing it right now. Will that correct itself? Even if it does correct itself, I'm not sure we're going to get those same lows where Biden was with Harris because they've just got the machine all around her. With Biden, it was split. They were trying to get him out, so the polls were looking worse and worse and worse for Biden, and he was resisting it. And he did not go away and say, okay, I'm leaving. They blackmailed him and forced him out, or they were going to do the 25th Amendment. That's another thing that liberals keep talking about. That's a complete lie. Biden did not want to step down. He said it 10 times. He tweeted it 10 times. They were making a fool out of him when they kept going on TV and saying, he's got to make his decision. Well, he already made his decision 10 times. I'm not trying to defend Biden. This is just what happened. So that's what happened in terms of that. Moving on to Minnesota. So certainly when it was Trump versus Biden, we were looking at Minnesota. Trump was making great ground there. Minnesota is now, and they did change this recently because of these two polls that came out. A Harris +6 Fox News poll, and then a Survey USA Harris +10 poll. Look, this is another thing that I'll show. So, and they don't do a lot of these, but they changed it. You can see the dates. It's like less than one a month. This was all the way back on March. They moved Minnesota to a toss-up. I remember, doing big news, talking about that. That was a big thing, Trump versus Biden. Virginia moved to a toss-up. That was another big thing in June. And then New Hampshire moved to a toss-up. And now they've switched Minnesota back because of those two polls from a toss-up to a lean Democrat. But if this is the best case scenario, I still have to give Minnesota to Trump, even if I think there's a less chance he's going to win it based on those recent polls, because it's only two polls, and this is a Trump best case scenario, and we're talking about a potential toss-up state. Let's not overreact to two polls there. Iowa, obviously Trump wins. Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana. Moving on to Illinois, obviously, you would expect Harris to win Illinois. Maybe I'll lighten it a little bit. This is look, Illinois, there were a few polls that came out that did have Biden. This is pretty impressive by Trump being competitive. These were really old polls, though. Is it worth it for someone to do a poll in Illinois? I think someone will. There'll be like colleges in Illinois that do it, maybe Chicago University or something, but nationally it's just not worth it. It's a waste of money because we know that Illinois is probably going to go to Harris. There'll probably be a poll that comes out that says Harris is up by like 14 or something like that because of the recent boost she's gotten. So I just can't see Trump winning Illinois even in a best case scenario. Moving on to Georgia. So Georgia is another state. It's the Rust Belt, but I would say right now it's mainly in terms of Harris where they're like, oh, she's improving significantly. I would imagine they would say it would be Michigan and Georgia. And that's because of the inner city votes. They're trying to galvanize that. They're going to be ballot harvesting. They're going to go to door to door. They're going to try and collect as many ballots as possible. They just had that concert in in Atlanta with the rapper coming in and trying to draw people. Kamala Harris couldn't sell it out. They had to hire someone to try and sell the place out. But right now, Trump has had such a nice lead in Georgia over Biden. Definitely in a best case scenario, Trump's going to win Georgia. It should be close, but I could still see Trump winning it by 3 or 4 points. Honestly, Florida obviously is going to go to Trump. South Carolina is going to go to Trump. North Carolina, we've seen some tightened polls there, but I would still expect Trump to take North Carolina. I just feel a little bit more safer about North Carolina than the other swing states based on Trump's track record with North Carolina. He's won it 2 times. They were very close. It was about 2 points, but I think he expands that a little bit to around 4 or 5 points. Moving on to Virginia, some interesting stuff with Virginia. People are starting to think Virginia might be easier for Trump to win than Minnesota now that the race has shifted with Kamala Harris running and not Biden. There have not been any polls. You can still see they say it's a toss-up. This was a poll. Well, this is actually not a great poll for Trump. The reason is because this is a New York Times poll, and who knows? It's from almost a month ago. But this is before the massive boost with the increased popularity for Harris. So I will say this is not a good. In these exact same polls, Biden was polling basically even with Trump. So I would say that this is probably not good news for Trump, but at this point, even if it's just one poll, I mean, I just think it's so ridiculous that a political party can literally say, okay, we're going to lose, so let's blackmail our incumbent and try and put someone else in to retain power. It's just crazy to me, and then they get rewarded for it. It's ridiculous, but certainly I still think Trump's going to win the election, but seeing some of these polls is hilarious, and this is the ebbs and flows. We understand it, but when it comes to Virginia, I am going to give it to Trump, but that's not a good look in terms of that poll. When it comes to the Rust Belt, we understand these are all going to be very close states. The Michigan plus 11 was completely erroneous. Remember, there was a Wisconsin, that poll that had Biden up by 17 a month before the election. Trump ended up outperforming that poll that was done a month before the election by over 16 points. So this whole plus 11 thing, 3 months before the election, I'm not worried about it. These are all going to be very close states. They are all going to be very, very close. But if we're doing a best case scenario, we will have to say that certainly Trump would win those states. That would give him to 314. Ohio, I am actually going to go Jill Stein to win Ohio. There's been some stuff. It's a grassroots movement out of Ohio. I'm kidding. But no, certainly Trump would win Ohio with J.D. Vance. Although, I'm not even sure J.D. Vance helps that much with Ohio. And I'm not one of those people that hates J.D. Vance. I know some Republicans hate the pick. But J.D. Vance really did not perform that well in 2022. Trump won Ohio by about 8.5 points, both in 2020 and 2016. Vance won it by 6 points in 2022. Maybe part of that's because Trump's not on the ballot and a lot of rural people didn't vote. I can understand it because it's the midterms, but still not a great thing. Either way, I would expect Trump to win. He was beating Biden routinely by 9 or 10 in the polls. Certainly, you would expect a victory in Ohio based off of the change there. You do have West Virginia, certainly going to be a Trump victory as well. And then all of these other states, seemingly it's going to be very hard for Trump to win. Well, New Hampshire is one right now. There have been a few polls that have Harris up by 4 or 5, but New Hampshire, listen, RFK could play big dividends in that. I do want to see if they have New Hampshire polls with RFK. Yeah, see, these are actually all recent polls. These are decent leads for Harris. I didn't realize they had this many polls. Moving on to the 5-way. Kennedy's only at 4%. You know what? I could have sworn I saw a poll where Kennedy was at 21% in New Hampshire. I'm not even kidding you. Maybe I'm just drunk or something. I don't know. Now, there were polls in New Hampshire that had Kennedy at a lot more. I don't know what happened. Maybe I just made that up one time and just believed it. But listen, New Hampshire, those are not great polls for Trump. But in a best case scenario, we're going to give it to him slightly. All these other states, I just cannot see. New Jersey, we'll have to see, but I'll lighten it a little bit. I can't see him winning New Jersey. Delaware, you could argue maybe with Biden now out, could it help Trump? Yes, but it's 3 electoral votes. Let's not really worry about that. Maryland, D.C., Rhode Island, Massachusetts, all going to Biden. And then you do also have the last 2 states, New York right now, going to Harris. And then you do also have the last 2 states with New York, I would say right now, probably going to Harris. I know people were saying, well, maybe in a Trump best case scenario, it might be possible. But if I'm going to be realistic, I mean, I need legitimate polling. Biden won New York by, 20 points or something, back in 2020. I mean, these are crazy polls, plus 7.5. That was a June poll where Trump was just performing greatly. I mean, it's crazy. Those were back-to-back polls, too, like in the span of 2 weeks. Man, I do remember that a little bit. But, yeah, those are, it's not like Trump would have beaten Biden. It was still a 7-point lead, but it is pretty remarkable how close it was getting. But certainly I don't think Trump's going to win that state at this point. And then you do have Maine. So Maine at large is definitely a state that Trump can win. And then when it comes to both of the districts, they say that the first district is definitely Harris. The second district is probably Trump. And I will go ahead and just agree with that. So I will give the first district to Harris, the second district to Trump, and then the at-large state, I will say Trump narrowly wins in a best-case scenario at this point. So this would probably be my best-case scenario for Trump in a more realistic sense, based off of the few recent polls that I saw. This is a best-case scenario, so obviously everything would have to fall right, but it would be probably even more realistic to do something like that, where you change Minnesota, and then you probably would also change New Hampshire based off of the recent polls, and then that might even be a more realistic best-case scenario for Trump, if you will. Virginia, we just don't have enough polling in it to really, do it. I mean, obviously, if this was Trump versus Biden, I could give Trump probably around, I could get to Trump to probably 380. It depends if I want to include New Jersey in that. I could probably get Trump to 400, honestly. I don't know, maybe. But obviously, it's Trump versus Harris. And yeah, I would say this is probably best case for Trump. Realistic best case. You want to argue Oregon is closer. I don't know, man. It's just impossible to say. Colorado, same thing. I do want to see if they have that one. I don't think they have that Colorado poll. I mean, Trump was competitive in Colorado, but there was another poll that had Trump down to Biden. I mean, we'll see what happens with all these polls and how they update. But I think Trump's best case would be in the range of 328, maybe to 340 at absolute best case. Realistic, maybe 316, 312 to 226. That was kind of the initial projection that we had when it was Trump versus Biden. I will be doing another poll where I realistically try and analyze this and give my predictions maybe tomorrow or the next day, but would just be a realistic Trump best case scenario against Harris, still taking basically all of the swing states, I guess, outside of Minnesota, although people have already shifted Minnesota back to the Democrats. And again, guys, things could change. I would expect Trump to get more of a boost within the coming weeks as the Harris hype wanes down and people start realizing that she is extremely, extremely liberal. They've already had to cut back on a number of her statements about banning fracking and just how ridiculous it was during the BLM stuff, basically admitting she wanted to defund the police. They tried to say it was a lie. It got proven to be true on Twitter. There is just so much stuff with Harris that is so bad. And I'm very confident Trump will end up winning this election, although right now the polls suggest it is closer, and this is just a snapshot. Maybe it'll change. Maybe she'll be right next to Biden in terms of polling in a month or two, just because, certainly she doesn't deserve to be here at all. That's just the reality. She didn't win any type of primary. She was picked as a DEI VP, and then she gets thrust into the role, not because they wanted her, but because they were very desperate that Biden was getting crushed in every single poll. That's why. There wasn't like, oh, Harris is putting so much pressure. She's been such a great VP. That was not it at all. Always remember it. That was not it at all. This was a desperation play. Remember before the debate, it was all, Republicans are conspiracy theorists. It's all deep fakes. It's all ridiculous. They were fully bought into Biden. That was the narrative they were going with. And the debate killed them, so they made the switch. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.